Hello, guys and gals, me Mutahar, and you might be wondering, what am I doing on this fine day, ladies and gentlemen? Well, I'm talking about the green-blue bubble problem. Now, I've talked about this before, and frankly, the last few days, I have left the iPhone blue bubble paradise, and I have become a filthy heathenous green bubble on the old Android. Now, I want to start off by saying I really don't care what phone you use. For most people, a phone is a way for them to talk to their friends, maybe look up a few applications, watch a couple videos, read some emails, and call it a day. Now, much like PlayStation versus Xbox, or Windows versus Mac, or really any of these stupid fucking wars that I find on the internet, I always feel like you have to be a really privileged shitbag to think that, you know what? I'm going to fight over which mobile device I use. Now, for most people, most normal people, they don't really give a shit, okay? But for some of the most shallow individuals in the world, there have been studies done that, according to the University of Chicago, the Becker-Friedman Institute, there are actual, 90% respondents, mostly college students in this case, believe that green bubbles on your texting app stigmatize Android users, often associating them with a lower social status and attractiveness. So some people think because you switch to the old green bubble, you might be one ugly piece of shit. You might even be a little poor. Now, again, for a lot of people, I guess an iPhone is a luxury product. Living in North America, I think I've seen every other person use an iPhone. And honestly, I'm more excited when somebody has the Android phone, because usually speaking, they have cooler phones than the standard iPhone person. Now, when comparing iPhones and Androids, something that I do like about, Androids a little bit more is while there are cheap iPhones, there are still cheaper and better Android phones for you to get. Again, if you're somebody that just wants a phone, there's nothing stopping you from picking up a cheaper Google Pixel 9a, for instance, which is around $500. Not a bad price for a phone. And of course, you can always, I think, install Graphene OS onto these and get even more privacy. If you want to completely de-Google your Google phone. And of course, on the opposite spectrum, you can even spend higher amounts than you could with an iPhone if you choose to go for some of the more lavish Android offerings. And let's just say you justify it, like I can justify me using a phone pretty much every day. Maybe this technology is super cool to you. It's still technology that Apple is not even attempting to play around with until everyone else has effectively already done the hard work. Now, the reason why I left the iPhone camp was because I feel like iPhones are like the ultimate baby devices. As somebody that is currently using a MacBook, I actually really enjoy this laptop specifically. I think Apple did a great job. They made their own hardware, and it's still a free, you still have the freedom to do what you want on it, You can't say the same for an iPhone. You want to install a third-party application that isn't on the App Store and you don't live in Europe? Well, tough titty. But Muta, you can use side-loading applications. It's just so much easier on an Android device to download an APK file and just install it. Like a fucking adult, you have the freedom to do what you want. You know what I mean? The other things that I had an issue with when it came to iPhones was, frankly, it was a little too optimized. And what I mean by that is, if I wanted to upload like a file, for instance, that was a few gigabytes, I could usually just upload it on my phone, start the process, turn it off, and basically toss it somewhere. With an iPhone, if that screen turns off in the middle of a transfer, even if that transfer's at like 99%, it will just destroy the transfer. It'll ruin it. The multitasking is so fucking on the wire that as soon as I turn down an application, all of a sudden, what'll happen is, that application will go out of memory. It will just suddenly stop working. So the reason why this happens is because, whenever you're using these third-party applications like Google Drive, one user, for instance, back in 2024 writes, as soon as the phone auto-locks, upload instantly fails. Why does the Drive app prevent the phone from locking? Why doesn't it, right? Upload constantly fails. And then, of course, there's no resume upload support. So granted, the easy kind of like patchwork fix is to make sure you set your phone to never turn off or never go into sleep mode if nobody touches it. But not everyone does that, okay? And that's just weird and uncumbersome to deal with, right? So of course, there's other situations where you look at Microsoft where they'll even say to conserve battery life, the iOS system may go to sleep during a large upload, making that upload take a long time. And of course, even 7 months ago for the iPhone Reddit here, one user says I switched to iPhone recently, he got the 16 Pro Lapse, And on iOS 18.2, he watches a video on YouTube, opens Reddit, Facebook, goes to YouTube, app is killed. The thing is, background applications and a lot of this stuff are so aggressively tuned on iOS because ultimately they want to make the phone feel smooth every time the user moves around, which is obviously, I would say, kind of important because the user experience is first and foremost. And then, of course, let's be completely real here, they're worried more so about really good battery life. So, of course, in order to maintain a good battery life, a lot of the stuff that's happening in the background for an iPhone usually gets culled as quick as it can be. And I don't think that, applications have an allowance of more than 10 minutes to stay active on the iPhone side. Whereas with Android, you can actually open up the battery settings and change the optimization levels of applications so you can keep things loaded in, or, you can let the system manage it intelligently. It's really up to you. And that's where, iPhones started to really lose me, because I wish iPhones had the ability to really treat their devices, these $1,000+ phones, as actual, computerized products, which they kind of can be replacements for if Apple let it happen. The other thing was customizing my iPhone device or phone device. Now, I'm not a huge customizer, but sometimes I like having a video wallpaper. Now, all this entire time, Apple has not allowed people to have a video as a wallpaper on the background or anything. Whereas with an Android, you just download an application, set a video wallpaper, and Bob's your uncle, things just work. Now, the reason why I went to Android was frankly because one phone that I was really excited was coming out, and that was the Galaxy Fold. Now, I'm a big Galaxy Fold guy. I've had Galaxy Folds before, and I'll tell you something right now. It's a foldable phone, so the idea is you tend to have a phone like this, and then if you want a tablet, you just kind of unfold the device, and whoa, you get a little tablet. Now, when the first Fold came out, I'll be honest with you, it looked like dog shit. Because really, it was one of those examples where it was trying to do too many things and none of it was successful. So for instance, the cover screen on an original Fold looked like, it was like a few inches at max, all right? There was like a huge bezel, and generally speaking, it's like, it wasn't really, it was just to check your notifications, maybe an email, maybe like a text message. You really had to unfold the device, and even the unfolded experience wasn't that great. Now, for the first time, and I've had a couple of these, the Fold 4, which I'm showing you right here, is a pretty thick bastard. You can even see the gap where, you can actually see between the two slices, the folded screen. But with this one, it's somehow thinner than, the iPhones that are out in the market, or any of these slab phones. It's actually, it's got a better cover screen now, and also it's got a better unfolded experience. So for the first time, it really feels like you have you have the actual foldable that can do both things pretty effectively, rather than do nothing great at all. And I think that is the big victory point here. Now, obviously, I'm sure people will laugh at me and say, oh, wow, who needs a foldable? People used to laugh at me when I bought that Note 2 back in the day, and that was a huge phone. Why do you need a phone that big? Now, everyone's got like a fucking 7-inch tablet they're putting on their ears. So, again, ladies and gentlemen, I really do think that, with devices like foldables and so many people making them now, I think that there is a market for this, and people are slowly starting to realize it's just a matter of time before these things start getting cheaper and more accessible for the average person to go and buy. But there are a couple things that obviously are going to be issues for some people. One of them is that blue-green bubble. So when it came to, me just talking to my brother as soon as I got this phone, he dropped me a message like, ew, bro, you got that green bubble? Now, a lot of people took this seriously, but it's actually just a joke. My brother is not a shallow prick like that, thank God. But I'm sure that there's some people who will probably look at your phone, as we've seen in studies, and probably look at the color of those bubbles and wonder, ooh, maybe times are a little tough for that person. Now, I want to stress that this stigma didn't just come out of nowhere. For years, Apple has never introduced RCS until much recently. And without this technology, it basically meant that for anybody that was messaging on iPhones, as long as you were on iPhone, you would register with iMessage. And I want you to think of iMessage like WhatsApp, where you basically register your phone number, and anytime you go into your messaging application and you enter a number to text, Apple will do a quick check on that number to see if it's part of the iMessage system. If it is, it will simply rotate the actual messaging backend to iMessage, which has a bunch of extra features. The green bubbles used to be the fallback to standard traditional SMS and MMS messaging, which lacked a lot of features. Now, ever since RCS was introduced, it doesn't really matter what color the bubble is. As long as both of you guys are on the RCS framework, a lot of those features like read receipts, typing indicators, high quality images and videos are now part of the norm. It doesn't matter what you're on. So if somebody complains about the bubbles now, well, they're just a conceited fuck. Now, it's crazy to think that the bubbles have locked in the mentality of so much iSheep at this point that even in antitrust lawsuits, literally the Department of Justice writes this, I'm not joking. If, example, an iPhone user messages a non-iPhone user in Apple Messages, the default app on an iPhone, then the text appears to the iPhone user as a green bubble and incorporates limited functionality. The conversation is not encrypted, videos are pixelated and grainy, and users cannot edit messages or see typing indicators. Now, Apple could release a iMessage app for Android, but that would take away a lot of the reason, I feel, for them selling their iPhones. So clearly they don't do it. Now, there's been entire campaigns from, Android and plenty of other handset guys that have said, please, Apple, hashtag get the message. So I've talked about this for years. All Apple has to do is enable something known as RCS, which is Rich Chat Services. Now, if Apple enables that, which they thankfully have, it means no matter what the color of your bubble is, the messaging is effectively the same. Now, if you're somebody that's switching over and you just need to be a blue bubble to your family members, to your friends, okay, because you just can't be poverty stricken, well, there's a couple options for it. For instance, there's a bunch of apps that allow you to rent iPhones in the cloud and use them as iMessage proxies. Now, I wouldn't recommend it because that is obviously you trusting another third party to store your messages. Don't do that. So, for instance, one of the things I found out was an app called Open Bubbles. Now, there's another app called Blue Bubbles, but generally the idea here is as long as you have a Mac or a MacBook, preferably one of those like Mac Minis that are always on and connected to the internet at any given moment, as long as you have something like that, you can use your Mac device as a liaison to, the iMessage system. Now, let's say you don't have a Macintosh system and you frankly don't want to waste the money on one. Well, that's totally fine too, because with an app like Blue Bubbles, they have an entire guide on how to use something called Docker OS X. So underneath a Linux system, you can start a Docker container that allow you to make a OS X virtual machine, a Mac OS virtual machine that you can then set up your iMessage in and route your bubbles through. But because I do have a MacBook, I guess I'll show you how this works. So as soon as you go to Open Bubbles website, you'll see that, you can get started and rent something from them. And I don't think they actually have any space. But let's say you go to the self-hosting side. So first thing, you want to go and install Open Bubbles on your actual Android device. And it's as simple as going to the Play Store, searching up Open Bubbles. So yeah, once you're on the App Store, you can see that Open Bubbles over here. You can just hit that install button and boom, the actual application is ready to go. After a couple seconds, it'll be done. Now, when you're on a Macintosh, it says to download and run the QR code generator. So I guess you run this, and mind you, please do this at your own risk. I am not responsible for any hacks, okay? Simple as that. That's all I have to say. All right, so here it is, Mac Hardware Info. That's the application they want. So you want to run this app, and first things first, it'll be like this app, Apple checked for malicious software, none was detected. So if that's the case, I guess all is gravy. Hit that big open button, and boom, you get this actual, QR code. Now I'm blocking this from your screen simply because I don't want you guys to get access to my fucking iMessage services, okay? That would be catastrophic. So here I'm scanning the actual QR code, it linked my MacBook, and then all I have to do is use that device. So you're in control, a new Apple device will appear on your Apple account. So of course, at this moment in time, you want to log in to your actual Apple account. Now, I'm not going to do this, but the general idea is using your Apple ID, which is your email address you have, you can jump into the iMessage network and text people. But here's the thing. With RCS, this is such a useless step that I really feel like unless, if people in your life care about the colors that fucking much, then cut them out of your life. I'm sorry to say, just cut them out. They are losers. Because right now, this is such an unneeded step. I've been messaging every single one of my family and friends with an Android device, and with RCS, it's as if I never left, okay? The videos look the same, the camera photos look the same. In fact, mine look slightly better because I have a better camera than my iPhone friends. And to be honest with you, even the stupid little gimmicky kickback reactions all work really well. Everything just works. The only thing I can't do is play pool with friends. You know, the little game app on the iMessage thing. That's about it. Now, there's a couple other things as an iPhone user that I actually miss. One of them is AirDrop. I love the ability for me to like grab a file and just chuck that shit into my laptop or whatever. So obviously I lost that feature because I switched to Android. I can only really easily do that between other Android devices, or God forbid, have a Windows computer where I link that to my Android device. But here's where it gets better. So I found an application called Local Send that you can download pretty much on Windows, Mac, Linux, everything. And it's a really easy application, runs in the background, you name your server, you restart things, everything works pretty much out of the box. And so now, depending on if I'm on an iPhone or an Android device, I can send any file and AirDrop it to any device. And it just works out of the box. Like, it's actually crazy to think that this app existed the entire time. You know, I could have easily been airdropping between everything. And I didn't even know this existed until obviously I switched over and I looked up what is the best AirDrop competitor. I would say, arguably speaking, this one application is better than almost every iteration of AirDrop because it's not even locked to one device. And that's one of the big problems with iPhone devices or Android devices or anything. Especially when you're on Macs, it feels like every time Apple wants you to send files back and forth, as long as it's sending to a Mac or an iPhone or it's uploading to the iCloud, everything works seamlessly in the background. But the moment you start to interact with any third party, that's when iPhone devices fuck up the most. And I feel like Apple does this by design to make you as annoyed as possible so that eventually your whole ecosystem just becomes Apple. Now, the other thing I needed was obviously some level of password management. So I used Apple Passwords to basically store a lot of passwords for a little bit until, of course, I discovered, obviously, Bitwarden. Now, I talked about this application in the past, and it's as simple as signing up, having a password that even they don't store, so it's actually very secure. And if you're somebody that doesn't want to store on Bitwarden, just self-host. You absolutely can do it. So immediately I went to my actual Passwords app on my Mac, which you actually do need a Mac for this. You can't do it on iPhones for whatever reason. And as long as you go to your files, export all the passwords to a file, and then import that very easily into Bitwarden, you can copy your entire keychain stack that is usually iPhone dependent or Mac dependent, all the way over to something that doesn't matter what system you're on. So you can run Bitwarden on Linux, Windows, Mac, any device. You're not locked in anywhere. So again, me mentioning this stuff is obviously designed to show you guys that if you're locked to an iPhone, it's never too late to start using other things. And you don't have to give up stuff. Now, the only thing that I really missed after this was backups. And this is where iCloud, it almost feels like everything does it for you seamlessly. And again, where I put in a bit more elbow grease was using a software known as Nextcloud. Now, I was able to download their server, set it up on an old computer that I have in the basement, and with this, I was able to create a backup solution where every photo that I took, every video that I took on my phone was automatically backed up to my own server. So I didn't even have to touch Google or anything else. Now, if you want to have something iCloud-like, I guess Google's a pretty good option, as I guess Microsoft can be pretty good. But you have choices when it comes to things like Android. So if you feel like you're locked in vendor-wise to Apple, don't, because you're absolutely not, okay? We live in a world where switching off is pretty goddamn easy. And there are just so much better like devices you can get when it comes to Android or anything, so many other options that you don't have to be stuck on the iPhones. Simply because that's what you've been using your whole life and that's where you're stuck in. Now, if there's legitimate reasons for you to be using an iPhone, and I think one of the most legitimate reasons is probably battery life, Apple does a pretty good job of locking down their system so that, you know, your device is pretty goddamn like Apple does a pretty good job of locking things down so your battery kind of lasts almost the entire day, at least in my opinion. And the other thing is, out of the box, a lot of iPhones are pretty much private and secure by design, which is something that not every Android device can be, can say. There's a lot of viruses that are also on Android, but generally speaking, it's much like PC. As long as you use this device with common sense, I don't think you have to worry about getting hacked all that much. But the other thing is, obviously, If you want to get a Google phone, for instance, and install things like Graphene OS or something more private, that's an option. And that's going to give you a better privacy experience than something like iPhones. Graphene at least will provide you something where even law enforcement agencies will probably have to scratch their heads a few times if they want to get access to your devices. And if you're somebody that really wants your privacy, you really want somebody not being able to snoop inside, Android devices with custom private operating systems are always the best option. But yeah, ladies and gentlemen, I became a filthy green bubble. And honestly, I didn't know that this was still a problem to this day, but it is. There's still a stigma. And if you feel like, the stigma applies to you or people are looking down at you, cut those individuals out of your life. And if you're somebody on the iPhone side that has been using it for years and you're like, man, I wish I could switch to one of these sweet Android devices, you can. It's not difficult. There's a lot of open source applications that do the exact same things iPhones do, but better, because they don't lock you in like a child to a certain sandbox or a walled garden. Ladies and gentlemen, this is me, Mudahar, and if you like what you saw, please like, comment, and subscribe. Just like if you dislike it, I am out.